Growing up, I spent every summer vacation at my grandparents' house in rural Tennessee. When I say rural, I mean their town was literally a cluster of homes with a singular one-lane road as the only way in and out. 45 minutes from the nearest freeway on-ramp, 30 minutes to a grocery store, and an hour and a half to a Sam's Club, Costco. My grandparents still live there and make the drive monthly, but fuck that. What I'm trying to say is, it's as remote as it gets. I'd play outside for hours and hours and maybe see 2 or 3 cars. It's a lot more built up now, but it was nice while it lasted. It was around 11:30 p.m. and me and my dad couldn't sleep because it was an especially hot and muggy night. We decided to take a drive through the hilly, curvy back roads that I absolutely loved and still do. There was a scenic access site that was just a clearing overlooking a cliff about 15 minutes further into the woods from my grandparents' house. It wasn't very well known. It was down a narrow 2-track lane with a couple of dilapidated trailers lining it every quarter mile roughly. Due to the isolation and lack of any real police presence, this area was full of meth during this time, and there was a local rumor of some inbred cult in the woods. Keep in mind, it was the middle of the night by the time we got to the parking lot for the overlook, which was just a gravel pit. My dad has always had a bit of a intuition and asked me if I really wanted to get out of the car. That made me hesitate, but I saw the amount of lightning bugs that were out, and catching them was my favorite pastime. Armed with a flashlight and an old Tupperware container with some holes drilled in it, we set off down the path to the cliff. We immediately heard noises in the woods. Heavy footsteps. Way too heavy for a deer, and there weren't really bears present in this area. The woods were usually quiet, besides that. We both thought we saw something hide behind one of the trees out of the corner of our eyes, and I didn't realize he saw it too until we brought it up in the car, and vice versa. Here's where it gets freaky. Once we made it down the path to the cliff, we saw an outline of a man. He was about my dad's height, 5'10", but he was as thin as the rail. He couldn't have weighed more than 120 pounds. Here's the thing, he wasn't admiring the beautiful moonlight scenery over the cliff. He was standing perpendicular to it, just staring off into the trees, perfectly still. My dad slightly nudged me in the direction of our car. As I started walking back, he shined a flashlight on the man. As soon as the light was shined on the man, my dad gasped and dropped the flashlight before literally picking me up and sprinting full force back to our car. As we peeled out, I had no idea what the fuck was going on. His face looked like a goddamn melted candle, he said after a few minutes of silence, after we had pulled out to the main road. Apparently, the man had no nose, just 2 nostril holes on his face. The way he was described sounded like he was a burn victim. We brought it up to my grandma the next day at breakfast. She immediately turned pale. Apparently, there was a meth lab explosion up in the hills a few months prior, and they were unable to rebuild the building, so they resorted to making their product in the woods. And were very defensive, even homicidal about their stash. So I'm new to Reddit and found this sub, and think this story fits here. I've had a number of odd, frightening experiences in the woods since. I'm a huge outdoors guy, and pretty much outside all the time I can manage it. So this happened when I was much younger. I want to say freshman in high school, probably around 2008. There used to be this road near where I lived, in California, called Crook Road. It was barely a road. No one traveled on it, and it was surrounded by small patches of forest and abandoned barns and houses. I would typically go there with my friends to skateboard and hang out. This one night, I was hanging out with 2 of my friends, Lucas and Dorian, and someone wanted to go to Crook Road to hang out since it was creepy at night. It might sound lame, but we loved exploring like a bunch of 5th graders, and weren't really into smoking or anything, so what else was there to do? I asked my then 20-year-old brother James if he could drive us down into one of the nature reserves by that road. This specific reserve was larger than the others and had a network of gravel paths leading through it. Basically, we were looking for unexplored territory to hike on. Soon, one particular path we were traveling down had become so narrow, James' Ford Explorer couldn't pass through it. So we got out and walked for a while, chatting and just having fun. We walked through the woods for about a half hour until it had gotten relatively dark out and the sun was gone, at which point we turned around to head back to the car. It's now I should mention that despite being near a lot of subdevelopments, this patch of forest was huge. I'd say about 1,000 acres, and rarely visited since it was easy to get lost in, especially at night. It was challenging to get the car turned around, but James managed it, and we're off down the road. Dorian proposed that we turn down a different path we had passed earlier since we had about another 40 minutes until our parents wanted us back, and we agreed. Down this path was a tiny pond Dorian wanted to check out and take pictures since he hadn't got the opportunity to visit it at night. It was slow going since the road was even crappier than the main one that we were traveling on that turned off a crook road. Minutes later, we got into a slight argument. Dorian was convinced that James had taken the wrong turn since we should have arrived at the pond by now, while James claimed that he had been driving straight the whole time. It was dark after all. Eventually, we came up to a fork in the road, and none of us were familiar with it. None of us knew which way to go, so we ended up guessing and going left, hoping that both directions ultimately led back to the main path. None of us were scared or anything. In fact, we were actually excited and intrigued, driving through the middle of nowhere at night. It was at this point where we rounded a small bend in the road, and the headlights fell upon a surreal sight. There were 4 figures emerging from the forest and crossing the road, wearing what looked like large cloaks and hoods up, holding flashlights. One guy at the back of the group was dragging a large duffel bag, a human-sized duffel bag. We all froze and stopped mid-conversation. As soon as our high beams landed on the 4 figures, they froze as well. James pulled to the left and went around them. Driving past them felt like an eternity because we couldn't have been going over 5 miles per hour due to the shitty road conditions. Sitting in the passenger seat, I could see them inches beyond my window, and they were indeed wearing black robes and holding flashlights. I didn't get a good look at the bag, but judging by the way the guy was holding it, something heavy was inside that bag. None of us said a word until the road straightened out, and we were far past these guys, at which point James muttered, "What the hell was that?" We continued down the road in silence until I heard Lucas say, "Holy shit," and repeated himself in a louder, panicked voice, "They're fucking coming back." I twisted around in my chair to see Lucas pointing out the back window. I could barely see anything, but about 100 yards away we saw beams of 4 lights, shaking erratically. The guys were without a doubt running after us. All of us screamed for James to floor it, and he sped down the road. The car was bouncing and shaking uncontrollably as we flew over the berms and potholes. I kept my eyes on the flashlight beams until we rounded another bend in the road, and they were out of sight. Thankfully, the path managed to take us back to the main path. James gunned it down the main path until we popped off by Croak Road and got the hell out of there. The weirdest thing about it was, there couldn't have been a vehicle anywhere near those guys for 50 miles in each direction. We would have seen one if there had been. We had explored most of those areas before, and there wasn't anywhere to pull off the road and park. We didn't say anything more until we were back at my place. We talked about it for a bit, and then my friends went home, and James and I went to bed. I didn't know if I should call the cops or not, but James, who I guess would be the adult in the situation, seemed reluctant, so I dropped it. I never told my parents until just before writing this, and they kinda scolded me for not telling them, and that we should have contacted the authorities, just to report suspicious people in the preserve. I still wish to know how the hell they got there, where they were going, and what was in the bag. My family and I were driving from Ohio to Wyoming one holiday season to visit family about 10 years ago. Due to the storms up north, we traveled straight west instead of northwest at first, and split the trip at Omaha, staying the night before heading up through Nebraska into South Dakota. Once we were far enough north, we turned west onto the I-90. At that point, it had been over an hour since we saw anywhere that might have had a public restroom, and we were on the state routes, so no rest stops. Those of you who have traveled with young kids know that that's close to their bladder's limit, and our daughter was begging us to stop somewhere to go pee. South Dakota was similarly deserted, or even worse, as we headed west. Finally, we reached a desperately needed rest stop, as my at the time 5-year-old and I both needed to pee by then. Just as we pulled in, the truck that had been following us for a while pulled in too. I didn't think much of it at first, until I started opening my door. My head turned to the right, where the truck was parked, a couple spots over. My eyes met the driver's, and I just shivered. He was a skinny white guy, straggly gray-brown beard, with dark eyes. I could see that he was wearing a dingy, dirty blue plaid shirt. He got out of his 90s brown and cream truck and started rummaging in the bed. I told my husband I didn't want to go into the rest stop alone because of this guy and the weird feeling I got from him. He thought I was being a little silly, but agreed to come with us. At that point, the next stop was Wall, South Dakota, about 100 miles according to the huge billboards we passed advertising it. He thought it was better to empty his bladder, even though he didn't particularly feel the need. I grabbed my daughter and we headed inside, followed by the guy who finished rummaging at his truck, but wasn't carrying anything when I glanced back. My daughter and I did our business in the women's restroom and headed back out the lobby. As I expected, my husband already was out there since he didn't have to chaperone a small child. The old guy was also in the teeny lobby area. He was just standing there staring at my husband. My husband rushed us back to the car. As we were buckling in, he locked the doors. He told me that the guy hadn't gone into the restrooms and was just standing in the lobby the whole time. He agreed with me that we might have just had a close call, and he was glad that it hadn't just been me and my daughter out there. However, that's not the end of the story. Remember how I mentioned Wall and that it was 100 miles away? Well, that was 100 miles of pretty empty landscape, but a decent number of turnoffs from the interstate. We didn't see the truck following us and thought the episode was behind us, except when we stopped in Wall to grab lunch and some road snacks, plus to look around the homely but fun little tourist trap in the middle of nowhere. We saw the guy in the store not even 20 feet from us. Same face, beard, dirty plaid shirt. Thankfully, we had already eaten, so since he was staring at us again, we quickly paid for our snacks and trinkets and got the heck out of there. Thankfully, we didn't see him again, but I was seriously creeped out until we reached our relatives in Wyoming, safely with no other sight of that truck. This happened a few years ago when my family was traveling out west. We were traveling through Saskatchewan late at night, and I was in the front seat with my dad, talking to him, helping him stay awake. We were on a 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere, and it was one of those places out in the prairies with literally no trees and barely any buildings for kilometers. I don't remember the last town we had gone through, but it was a good 30 kilometers back, and I remember the next town we went through was a good distance after this encounter. After driving for a while, we see this guy on the side of the road just staring at our car as we drove by. He wasn't hitchhiking or anything, and didn't have a car or bike or anything with him. He just stood in the grass right by the road staring at us and watching us go by. This was in the middle of nowhere, no trees, no farmhouses nearby, just a guy in a white shirt and jeans in the middle of nowhere. Needless to say, my dad stepped on the gas after that. It was definitely one of the strangest things I've seen, and wondered what could have driven someone to just be out on the road at night in the middle of nowhere like that.
This happened earlier last year, and still messes me up thinking about it. For a little backstory, I'm a delivery driver for a certain foods company, and have been doing so as a side gig for the past year or so to earn extra money. I'm also female. Anyway, yeah, it's a super chill job. Although the pay is definitely not ideal, especially at night. Normally any pings I get after 10 PM are just crappy fast food orders to customers who are just there, just out of their mind, drunk normally. Anyway, late night deliveries are already profitable through tips, which is why I barely do them. I, however, on this night last year, find there's a bonus going on. Reach 15 deliveries in a certain time and get an extra $75. Music to my ears. Well, that's the case. Late night deliveries rock because there's no traffic, and it doesn't matter when you're picking stuff up. The faster you can get them done, the faster you can go home and knock out. Open roads all the way for me. I was on a roll and finished my last McD's run at 2:30 in the morning, cash my bonus and call it a night. For context, this took place in downtown San Diego. Downtown SD has fun restaurants and clubs at the core, but as you branch out, it gets more seedy. Once you get past 16th Street, it gets hella shady. Lots of homeless, the works. I actively try and avoid the area, but in order to get back home and on the freeway, I have to pass through the neighborhood. One more piece of information, I drive a crappy old Ford and nothing's automatic. In order to roll down the window, you have to crank the lever. Because it's a hassle to roll them up and down manually each time, when I do deliveries, I just keep both my windows rolled down because it's easier to pick up / deliver through the windows. This night, I had my windows down as usual. I was planning to roll them up before I passed 16th Street, where the homeless camp was, but didn't get that far. As I turn down a side street heading towards the main drag, up ahead I see a man in one of those orange reflective construction vests standing on the side of the road. There's always some sort of construction going on downtown, and it's pretty common for it to happen at night, so I didn't really pay much attention. As I get closer though, the man stops in the middle of the street waving his arms. I begin slowing down, thinking that he's going to direct traffic or something. I brake to 10, then 5, leaving distance trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. He breaks out into a jog towards my car, stopping directly in front of it, blocking me and my car from moving forward. God, immediate unease. This is weird. I'm really wishing that my windows were done up. People are talking about fight or flight, and I've always wondered how I'd react in that situation. Now I know, my reaction is to freeze, because as I was slowing down, it hit me 5 seconds later that I should not have. The guy's not a construction worker. He has on a hard hat and vest, but the creepiest smile I've ever seen in my life. At first I thought he was just smiling to be friendly, but smiling to acknowledge someone longer than a few seconds is not normal. Try it right now. Count to 5 in your head while grinning and you'll see what I mean. Exactly what he's doing. Now that he's in front of me, I can tell he's homeless, or I don't know. He's an older guy. I guess 60s, but homelessness has a way of making everyone appear old, so who knows really. But he's just staring at me, wide-eyed, smiling, all teeth. Honestly, his smile and mannerisms, the best way I can describe it is Twisty from American Horror film. Literally though, the guy looks insane. I obviously should have reversed, but my brain was panicking and I didn't think that fast. I was instead frozen in my car thinking, this is how I'm gonna die. This whole time he's not saying a thing, just leering. Then like a ninja, he jumps onto the hood of my car and slams his fists against my hood. I'm frozen in terror just watching this guy. He starts pounding on the hood of my car, crawling around on his hands and knees, not saying anything, just crawling and staring at me. That was the most terrifying part, that he never breaks eye contact once during all of this, and never stops grinning. The thought of my windows being open made me want to throw up, but at the same time, breaking eye contact and moving to roll them up felt scarier. Like if I made any sudden movements or looked away, he'd try and get inside. He never says a word. I think it would have been less scary if he said something, but he didn't. Just pounded his fists on the car and stared. All in reality, this whole time probably lasted seconds, but felt like days. I'm freaking out, and before I can gain the sense to do anything remotely intelligent, I see headlights in my rearview mirror coming up from behind me down the street. The man sees them too, and in an instant he jumps off my car, runs from behind me towards a new car. Jesus, I floor it and don't look back until I'm halfway home on the freeway. At this point it's all adrenaline. For a long time after that I stopped delivering at night. I sure as hell don't want to go down that section of road again anymore. I take the longer route home, and I don't drive with the windows down at night if it's in an even remotely run down area. What I realised from this is how naive I can be just to go onto autopilot to deal with situations because someone has a uniform. Like, I didn't even question slowing down at first, even though it is a situation that is really sketchy. The opposite actually in my mind. I was confronted and confirmed by the fact that somebody trustworthy was on the road. Suspicious thoughts went by like, oh nice, a public servant doesn't want to make a wrong turn. By the time I stopped, it would have already been too late if the guy decided to attack me, and I shudder thinking about it. I calmed down eventually by reassuring myself that this is probably just a crazy guy on drugs who meant no harm. But it might not have been. The fact that this guy is dressed as a worker on the road, deliberately behaving normal at first, is a part that really scares me. I pray to God I never have a similar experience in my life. I can say though that I learned from this one. This happened just last night, and honestly I'm still a little shaken over it. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a small medium-sized Midwestern town. I was driving home at 2 AM when I stopped for gas. In retrospect, it was stupid I stopped at all. The gas station was poorly lit and completely empty of any customer cars. But I knew the shady areas of town, and this was not usually one of them. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a middle-aged woman sitting on the curb across a parking lot. It's a cold night and just started raining. The woman was not wearing the weather-appropriate clothing, so drenched. When the woman saw that I was watching her, she called out to me from across the parking lot. My second moment of stupid decisions was choosing to engage with her. I was worried for her, so I approached her to see if she wants some help. Hi beautiful, I'm just trying to get home, but no one's gonna help me. I see you're a taxi driver, and I'm trying to get from city A to city B. I could really do with your help. I've been out here for ages. Can you help me? Now I don't usually give money to panhandlers, but she seems genuine. The weather was terrible, and there's lots of job centres around that are shutting down, so I agree. I tell her I don't have cash, but if she comes inside I'll give her a couple of dollars. Now, the ATM isn't working. I apologise and told her that there's nothing else I can do. She follows me back outside, idly chatting with me as I get to my driver's door. She then says, "But you're a cab driver," and gets in. I was totally shocked to really say anything. I sat there and watched as she buckles herself in like it's a completely normal situation. As soon as she got into my car, her demeanour changed. She's no longer anxious, she's now restless. "Just take me to my aunt's house. She can give you money." Of course alarm bells are going off in my head, although my first instinct is to tell her to get out of my car. My gut tells me that if she does, it's not dangerous, but she's already proved that she's unpredictable and high, and I don't know if she has a weapon. Forcing her out of my vehicle, I thought I had the potential to avoid a violent interaction. "Why are you asking me?" I finally said. "Just start driving, I'll tell you later." "No, if you want me to consider driving you, I need you to tell me where you want me to go." I never had an intention of driving her. She said, "Don't worry, honey. I'm not just one of the bad people here. I'm not going to rob you, just drive." "No," I repeat. "What's her address?" "Okay, it's Street A." "What's her house number?" As I was asking her questions, she gets agitated. We still had not left the gas station parking lot. I considered getting out of the car and going into the gas station for help, but A, she seemed to know and be friendly with the one attendant who's inside when I tried to get money, and B, I wasn't about to leave my car alone. Finally, she snapped at me and said, "Why are you asking me questions? You don't trust me." I then said, "I work at the police department, it's my job," and she flips out, yelling at me, calling me a snitch, about trying to get her in trouble and just losing her darn mind. At this point, I'm more scared than ever. I just want her gone, but my instincts told me asking her to get out of my car couldn't work, so I decided to take a risk. I say, "I'm not a police officer, I just work at a police department. Why don't I take you to Walmart and see if they have ATMs at work?" My idea was to get her out of my car as peacefully as possible and get her into the store. She likes my idea and immediately calms down. I know that it's incredibly risky driving off with a stranger in the car, but it seems my best option at the time. As we're driving, she keeps asking me to take her home. Her thoughts are erratic, literally bouncing all over the place. It was really like a look into a crazy person's mind. Here's some of our conversation. "I'm glad we're friends now. I have about 6 people trying to get me. I'm gonna come to your work tomorrow so you can go arrest them together." "Okay, we can talk about that tomorrow." "You said you're trying to get home, right?" "Yeah, I'm trying to get to this city." Then I said, "I thought you needed to go to the other one." She said, "Yeah, that's what I meant. That's why the cab ride is $40 away." I said, "The cab ride is $40? She said, "Yeah." "You said you had $40. "I do, but I mean it's 60. There's now silence. "Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's house? She lives close." "I thought you said she lived somewhere different." "No, I meant that one. But it don't matter because she won't give you the money anyway. You sure you can't just take me to my city?" Now it was terrifyingly obvious that this woman was not talking sense. The details of her story are constantly changing. We pulled into Walmart, and she finally gets out of the car. I told her before we went to find an ATM that I need to use the restroom. My plan was to call the police from inside a store, but she followed me into the bathroom. This is where she effectively corners me. I bolt out of there and lean against a barrier. I then said, I have some friends at the police department that can probably help you better than I can. I'm just gonna call them and we can figure this out." Again, at the mention of cops, she starts to really flip out. I kept retaining that the police would help her. She snapped to me that she was going to leave and stormed out of the bathroom, but it wasn't over yet. I waited to make sure she was really gone, but sure enough, not 60 seconds after she left, she came back into the bathroom and started banging on the door, and said something that scared the life out of me, saying, "Hey, come back to the car with me. I left my beer in your car." I blatantly tell her no. I saw her getting into my car and she had absolutely no beer with her. I wait a good 5 minutes before exiting the bathroom. I immediately found a manager who called the police. Thankfully, I was in a different police jurisdiction from the one I worked in, but I was mortified at how entirely stupid I'd been the whole night. The police officer that responded took my statement and advised me to be more careful in the future. He said that sometimes panhandlers turn violent, and that just recently there had been a report of a woman who matched her description assaulting a Samaritan trying to help her. I definitely learned a lesson on stranger danger. I'm lucky to have come out unscathed. I'm glad that my stupidity didn't kill me,